Catherine had woken early that morning, coughing up phlegm, relieved in the knowledge that someone had been watching her from the garden again. There were 2 dirty handprints on the glass in the door. They were clearly visible from under the table when she pulled back the sheet. She hadn't been imagining him. "That's another one," said Catherine, feeling a sharp stab on her arm. "This blanket's got fleas. I should incinerate it. Burn the little monsters alive." Monsters can take on many forms, she thought. They come to seek you out in all their different shapes. Some come as fleas to feed on your blood, attracted by the sweet smell of your skin. Others, like rapists, come with lusts in their thoughts. But then there are those devils that come with more sinful intentions, departing the scene only after the heart has stopped pumping the blood. But what makes a monster? Are monsters born at the moment when the sperm penetrates the egg? Is it then that the mutation grows into the beast? Do the cells divide and mutate into the hate that will one day destroy and murder? Are monsters born, or are they made? Catherine caught one of the fleas and popped it with her sharp fingernails. "That's one of you gone," she said, scratching the fresh bite until it started to bleed. "It's the females. They're the ones to watch for. The blood-sucking females. Or is that only the mosquitoes? I don't remember." Monsters are presented in the form of classical beasts in our mythologies. Max knew all about monsters. He would tell Hop, his best friend at college, all about them. Catherine hated Hop. She couldn't stand him. He was a bad influence on Max and stood in the way of her desire to seduce him. Max was the most beautiful young man she had ever set eyes on, and worth risking her relationship with Mike for. What Catherine didn't know was that night after night, Hop and Max would go to the treehouse on the college grounds, and Hop would listen to his friend under a warm blanket. Max would explain how people were prejudicial by nature, denigrating anyone who dared to be different, calling them monsters. Monsters, Hop, are portrayed as deformed and deranged creatures in film and comic books, but who says monsters must be ugly? Or hideous fiends? Monsters can take on human form, as you know, said Max, grinning. As with the werewolf or vampire, Hop replied. I mean that monsters can be like you and me. The serial killer who stalks the town could easily turn out to be your good neighbour, or the psychopath in the office who has learned to hide his evil well. You may well have monsters in your house, Hop. The unruly little child screaming before bedtime. Sounds like my brother Kip, said Hop. He liked to scream the house down if he didn't get his own way. Max is right, she thought. Monsters can appear in the most unexpected places. Your own little boy or girl may look sweet and harmless, but what are they thinking, sitting all alone in their bedrooms? Are they planning their next wicked deed? Yes, monsters come in all forms, male and female. You see, said Catherine, who had taken to speaking out loud out of loneliness, they get their hooks and suckers into you and infect you with their disease-spreading bacteria. She sneered and popped another flea. They have, therefore, forfeited their right to live. Catherine had been experiencing stomach pains all day, preparing for a home invasion. Her hands were stiff with the cold, and she couldn't keep warm. Her heartbeat fluttered out of control as she became more hyperactive at the very thought of an attack. But then came another stomach cramp. It's pesticides, that's what it is, she said, slurping cold soup from the tin. I'm being poisoned. You can't eat anything these days. Nothing is safe. If Catherine had cared to take a glance at the label, she would have noticed that the soup was long past its sell-by date. Catherine knew it was Maximilian outside. The black shape lurking in the garden each night had his size and shape, and if she risked opening the window, she would swear she could smell his musk oil. Max was never visible during the daylight hours, but his undetectable movements didn't mean that he wasn't in the garden. No, Max, you had your chance, but you had to go and reject me. She took a deep breath and walked over to the sink with her empty glass. Turning on the cold tap, she tried to fill her glass with the chlorine-rich water. She felt the palpitations in her chest settle to a more comforting rhythm. The pain in her stomach, however, was just as spiteful as it had been during the day. Oh, she forgot, the water's been stopped. She fiddled with the taps, but nothing happened. There is no water. Catherine knew that her body was trying to tell her that something was wrong. But what was it? Her hands are cold, she is sure of that, even inside her woolen gloves. And her feet also need the warmth of a pair of slippers to ease the pain in her toes. But now there are the palpitations, and the fear that her adrenaline is pumping and poisoning her arteries. Catherine was agitated as she sat under the kitchen table. She thought again, inspecting the bruises on her arms and legs, and then felt some relief at the conclusion of her diagnosis. There isn't anything medically wrong. It is just that Catherine has a little too much testosterone for a girl. All she needs is a good workout, some hard exercise to use up all the surplus energy she has, and to burn off the fat that she's been putting on, not having left the house in days. How can she leave the house? Max is waiting for her outside. No, she'll pull herself together, motivate herself to wash the bedding and tidy the floor around her den. Perhaps, she said, clenching her fists, I could try to make it upstairs, sleep back in my bed. Catherine thought for a moment, soon realising that this was out of the question. Oh, Mr. Chesterton, she laughed, looking at the clock on the wall. It was 8:30. I'm not scared of you. Catherine thought about how she would react if Max did enter the house. He would surely overpower her. He had done so before. She knew he had the strength to hold her down. The question remained as to whether he had the nerve, and to whether she would have the courage to fight. Perhaps we should get it over with, she said, staring out of the window and into the darkness. Catherine felt the warmth returning to her fist as she rubbed it in her right palm. For a moment, the thought of leaving the door open sent a flurry of excitement through her chest. But no, she mustn't do anything so reckless, and not today. She returned to the table, picking up a copy of Sense and Sensibility, and hurled it at the window. She then lifted the tablecloth and climbed back under. The kitchen was starting to smell really bad. She looked at the stains and dirty prints around her bucket. The floor is so dirty. Why hasn't Mike washed the floor? Catherine felt the cramp return to her stomach and took to squatting over the bucket again. Is this fear, she thought? No, it can't be fear. She looked at the dead twigs in the vase on the table and the dried rose petals scattered beneath. Catherine felt a moment of shame at her weakness. Mike was kind and considerate. What reason was there to hurt him so? But the pains were getting worse. She clutched her stomach again, feeling sick. Perhaps it was Catherine's nervous system that was punishing her for her odious crimes, sending little electric shocks to pulse around her veins. But then Catherine was never a girl to feel guilt or remorse, and she wasn't afraid of any reprimand. It's a nutrient deficiency, she said, watching the silverfish scurry across the floor tiles. This is a haven for parasites. There's no wonder I'm ill. They creep on you. They creep onto their hosts, and... Who is that? She said, as a noise from somewhere in the house interrupted her thoughts. Catherine stopped scratching and listened. Mike? Is that you, Mike? I'm in the kitchen, sweetie. I'm in terrible pain. Catherine heard a newspaper being pushed through the letterbox, so she got off the bucket and hurried to see. There it was, Mike's daily sticking in the door. She pulled it out. The letterbox snapped shut, and she returned to the kitchen. She threw the newspaper under the table. The print had stained her fingers. She needed to wash her hands. She walked over to the taps, again forgetting that there isn't any water. She could hear the noisy rooks outside in the garden and wished she had a shotgun. Then she saw it, a fresh bottle standing behind the dirty, deep, fat fryer. She reached for her corkscrew, opened the bottle and poured herself a large glass of Chardonnay. Catherine took a gulp from her wine glass, dribbling wine down her chin. She felt weak and irritable. "There's so much for Mike to do when he gets in. I hope he isn't going to be much longer," she snarled. "He's starting to annoy me now. The cracked window needs replacing before the spring as well. The warm weather will have the mosquitoes getting in, and Mike won't be the only one to suffer." Raised by her dominating grandmother after the untimely death of her mother in a climbing accident in Scotland, Catherine somehow had turned into a bully. Catherine was only 6 when her mother died. Her father couldn't cope and took to the drink. David, her younger brother, 3 years. Catherine was sent to an all-girls school on her grandmother's insistence. She hated it at first. Arriving at the school at 6 years old, she had missed out on the first year, and all the girls had already got long-established friendships. The girls were quick to tease and exclude her, but Catherine was strong and confident. She was also good at making friends. She would hang around the bike sheds at break time, chatting to the outcasts. The fat girls and the skinny girls, girls with glasses and smelly girls, and the girls with strange and funny voices. They all found their place with Catherine. The other girls, however, would continue to call her names. Witch, Satan's bride, psycho bitch were just a few of their insults. When Catherine turned 12, she moved back to live with her father and David. She then changed to a mixed grammar school and built up a strong, loving bond with her brother. She would go out of her way to protect him from the other boys, who were usually scared of her and her reputation. Having taken on this new identity at school, and being a natural tomboy, she started to pick on the girls at break times, lunch times, and at the school gates at home time while waiting for her dad to arrive in his black Rover. So it wasn't long before she was getting into regular fights with the other girls, and after a particularly vicious one, when she broke the arm of an older girl, her luck changed, for she now started to become popular with the girls in her class, and she was soon being worshipped by some of the most unlikely of girls. She formed a gang, selecting those with the prettiest faces and the longest, straightest hair. Catherine particularly favoured the blonde girls and became known as the Blonde Protector. She would take them out on blonde patrol, looking for boys to beat up or to humiliate by debagging them and stealing their trousers. Catherine decided to walk to the back door. It was dark outside. She couldn't see much of the garden, but she could see the apple tree at the end, as it was lit up by the light from her neighbour's upstairs window. She couldn't see the small pond below the tree, or the spot where she had once dug a hole and hidden something deep in the earth. She thought about Max. She put her finger on the damp glass above his handprints on the door and drew the outline of his face. Catherine caught her finger on the crack in the glass, and now she was dripping blood onto the kitchen tiles. "Cathy keeps hurting herself, Max. Look, I've cut myself again." "Look what you've made me do, Max. I know you're out there watching. You should have kept your promise. If you had kept your promise, you'd be with your Catherine now. You're such a fool, Max. I'll not be the one to feel guilt or shame. Why should I be the one to feel remorse? Just go, Mr. Chesterton. Mike will be home soon." The mouse that Catherine couldn't catch crept out from under the cooker. It sniffed the air and then ran back under it. Catherine had always been quite happy to let a bit of nature creep into her life, whether it was the mouse in her kitchen or a large spider that she knew would scare Mike, whether it was the odd bit of moss on her window ledge which she considered to be a welcome decorative touch to her drab student accommodation, or the occasional bee. But without Mike to clean and maintain the house, nature was creeping a little too close for comfort, and now she had Max to deal with too, another pest. Catherine returned to her den. It was now dark and she hadn't found the matches. She lay awake on the blanket, her head resting on the newspaper, thinking how it was time for her to put an end to all this trouble. Someone would have to suffer, but it wasn't going to be her. End of chapter 9.